The house felt impossibly silent. Every corner echoed with memories of her laughter, the soft hum of her presence, the way she had moved through the rooms with an effortless grace that made even the dullest day seem brighter. Now the walls seemed to close in, each shadow a reminder that she was gone. I had always believed that grief could be measured, that there was a limit to heartbreak. I was wrong. The moment I learned she was gone, the world seemed to collapse in on itself. Her passing had been sudden, cruelly abrupt, and merciless in its timing. One moment she was there, whispering a joke about her garden, and the next she was gone, leaving a silence that roared louder than any noise I had ever known. The funeral preparations were a blur. Flowers, caskets, arrangements, each detail a knife twisting deeper into the wound. And through it all, I clung to the idea that family mattered most in times like these, that grief, in its most authentic form, was meant to be shared with those we loved. But that illusion shattered the moment I called my son. "Dad, I don't think I can make it," he said, his voice flat, almost rehearsed. "What do you mean you can't make it? It's your mother. She's gone," I said, shock cracking my voice. "It's not worth my time," he said, as if discussing a minor inconvenience rather than the death of the woman who had raised him. "Don't bother me. I have other things to do." The line went dead before I could speak. My hands shook. My heart raced. I sank to the floor, the phone slipping from my grasp, and I stared at the ceiling, hoping it was a dream, some cruel trick that I would wake from. But it wasn't. He had said those words. My wife's funeral was a small, intimate gathering. Friends, distant relatives, neighbors who had always adored her. They all came to pay their respects. And there I was, standing alone, feeling the absence of the one person who should have been beside me the most. My son's empty chair was a loud, glaring symbol of betrayal. People offered their condolences. They murmured gentle words of comfort, but their voices couldn't penetrate the wall of pain that surrounded me. Memories assaulted me relentlessly. Her smile in the kitchen, the way she would hum while gardening, the sound of her voice calling me for dinner. And amidst it all, one memory stood out the way my son had once promised to be there, to love and honor both of us unconditionally. I felt a strange mix of grief and anger. The grief was expected, manageable even, but the anger cut deeper than anything else. How could someone I had loved, someone I had raised, turn away when the world had collapsed around me? How could he dismiss the woman who had given him everything, love, guidance, laughter, life itself, as not worth his time? After the funeral, I returned home to a house that felt more like a mausoleum than a home. The air was heavy with silence. I wandered from room to room, touching the things she had left behind: her favorite mug, the book she had been reading, the quilt she had been knitting. Each object was a shard of memory, each memory a pang of unbearable loss. I called him again. No answer. Texts went unread. Messages left in voicemails returned nothing but emptiness. Each unanswered call, each ignored message, was a reminder that he had chosen his own life over his family. My own flesh and blood had abandoned me at the hour I needed him most, and in that silence I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to acknowledge before. This wasn't just grief. It was betrayal, a betrayal so deep it felt like a physical wound, one that might never heal. I sat in her favorite chair that evening, the one by the window where she used to watch the sunset, and I allowed myself to cry. Not just for her, but for the son I thought I knew, for the family I thought we had, for the life that had been ripped away. I was alone, truly alone, but even in the depths of that darkness, a seed of something else began to take root. A quiet, simmering fire, not for revenge yet, not for anger alone, but for recognition, for justice, for balance. I didn't yet know how, or when, or if it would take shape, but I knew one thing: the world and my son would remember this betrayal. And when they did, they would understand that some wounds, once inflicted, demand acknowledgement. The days that followed my wife's funeral were like walking through fog. Grief weighed down my every movement, yet there was something sharper underneath it all, an ache of betrayal gnawing at the edges of my mind. I tried to bury it beneath routines, paying bills, tending to the house, doing the mundane things that reminded me life continued even when it felt meaningless. And then I saw it. It started with a ping on my phone, a notification I didn't want to see but couldn't resist. A photo and another, my son, his wife, Florida, sunlight glinting off water, cocktails in hand, smiles so wide and carefree it made my chest tighten. He had skipped the funeral, he had abandoned me, and now he was laughing, vacationing, living. I stared at the images one after another, feeling a cold rage coil in my chest. Each photo was a deliberate insult. Even if he hadn't meant it that way, it didn't matter. In my mind, the world had narrowed to a single point: him flaunting a life of ease while his mother's coffin still rested in the earth. I could have called him, screamed, demanded an explanation, but I didn't. Anger tempered by grief turned into something quieter, sharper. A patient, simmering observation. I watched his posts, not obsessively, at least I told myself that, but carefully. Noting the details, the expensive restaurants, the hotel charges, the car rentals. I saw the little signs of carelessness hidden beneath their smiling facades. I remembered the promises I had made as a father. I had worked tirelessly, sacrificed endlessly, and provided every opportunity I could. And he, my own son, had thrown it all away, dismissing love and loyalty as inconvenient. For days, I did nothing openly. I kept up appearances, went about my business, but inside, a plan began to take shape. Not a wild, impulsive plan, but a slow, deliberate one. One that would not be born of spite alone, but of poetic justice. There is a certain satisfaction in waiting. The anticipation sharpens the senses. Every careless post, every cheerful selfie, every brag about their perfect vacation, added fuel to the fire. I studied their patterns, I learned their habits, and I realized something that made my chest tighten, not with grief this time, but with the cold clarity of purpose. They were leaving themselves exposed. I smiled at the thought, quietly to no one, alone in the house that had once been filled with laughter. My wife would have appreciated that, I thought bitterly. She had always loved a clever plan, a sense of poetic justice. The week passed slowly, each day filled with the small torments of seeing their happiness while I suffered. But I did not act impulsively. I kept my dignity, kept my eyes on the prize. I knew that when the time came, the lesson would be undeniable. And then, as if the universe had heard my silent vow, the call came. It was him, my son, panicked, hesitant. Uncertain, the arrogance I had known all my life replaced by fear. "Dad, the mortgage, it hasn't been paid," he said, his voice tight, almost pleading. I stared at the phone for a long moment, letting the silence stretch. My chest felt oddly light. The rage that had threatened to consume me was now calm, deliberate, and steady. "I don't care anymore," I said. My voice was flat, but every syllable carried the weight of betrayal, grief, and the quiet authority of someone who had been wronged. There was a pause on the other end, then a series of frantic questions, excuses, pleas, and I didn't answer. I didn't explain, I didn't intervene. I let him hang there, caught in the consequences of his own carelessness. For the first time since her death, I felt something like relief, not joy, never that, but relief, a subtle, intoxicating sense of balance being restored, however slowly. I hung up and walked through the empty house. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting lines across the floor like bars. I paused in the living room, thinking of her, of him, of the life that had been broken and betrayed. And I knew this was only the beginning. The world, it seemed, had a way of correcting itself, if one was patient enough to wait. The morning started like any other, but the world felt different somehow. I had walked past her favorite chair by the window, touched the quilt she had left behind, and for a moment I let the memory of her warmth wash over me. Then I picked up the phone, Not to call my son he had already learned in the cruelest way that I would not come running, but to check the details myself. I had waited patiently, observing from the shadows, watching him flaunt his carefree life while I buried the woman who had given him everything. But I had also prepared, quietly, behind the scenes, I had ensured that the smallest cracks in his life would widen, unnoticed until the moment they could no longer be ignored. The call came that morning. Dad eyed the mortgage. He stammered, his voice tighter than I had ever heard it. Panic laced every word. It hasn't been paid. I don't know what to do. I could hear his wife in the background, her voice shrill, urgent, panicking. And I said the words I had been holding back, letting them fall like a hammer. I don't care anymore. The silence on the other end was palpable. I imagined the blood draining from his face, the sudden realization that the life he had taken for granted was slipping through his fingers. The arrogance, the entitlement, the smugness he had worn like a shield, all of it crumbling under the weight of responsibility he had ignored. It was poetic, almost too perfect. He stammered, pleaded, tried to explain. I thought Mom was handling it. We were on vacation. I let him drown in his excuses. Let him feel the panic, the fear, the humiliation that comes from being confronted with the consequences of your own negligence. I had spent years teaching him, guiding him, sacrificing everything so he could have the world, and he had thrown it all away. I thought of her, my wife, how she would have quietly nodded at my restraint, how she would have known that true justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers patiently until the moment arrives. He asked again, desperate, voice cracking, "Please, Dad, can you? I'll fix it. I cut him off. Cold, calm, unyielding. I told you, I don't care anymore. And then silence. It wasn't cruelty. It wasn't revenge for revenge's sake. It was acknowledgement of truth, the truth that he had abandoned us, that he had disrespected his own family, that he had treated love as a convenience and responsibility as a burden. Now he would face the consequences he had so carelessly ignored. The days that followed were quiet, yet every interaction was a reminder of the power shift. Calls from banks, letters, urgent notices. He faced them all, floundering in a world I had helped him understand, but had never truly navigated on his own. I watched from a distance as his life began to unravel. I didn't gloat, not in the way the world understands gloating. But there was a deep, undeniable satisfaction in seeing reality meet arrogance, in watching someone so certain of their invincibility finally recognize their vulnerability. And through it all, I felt a strange clarity. The grief that had once consumed me was still there, but now it was tempered by something stronger, strength, resilience, and the quiet knowledge that I had not lost everything. My wife was gone, yes, but her memory, our love, and the lessons we had shared had not. I was still standing. I was still capable. And my son, my own flesh and blood, had been forced to learn in the harshest way that actions have consequences, and betrayal does not go unnoticed. For the first time in weeks, I walked outside. Sunlight hit my face, warm and real, and I let myself breathe deeply. The world had shifted, not in grandeur, not in spectacle, but in the subtle, undeniable way that justice often arrives, quietly, patiently, perfectly timed. And somewhere deep inside, I knew that this was only the beginning of his reckoning. The house was quiet again. The kind of quiet that wasn't heavy or oppressive, but calm, measured, reflective. The storm of grief, rage, and betrayal that had consumed me since my wife's passing had settled, leaving something stronger behind, clarity. I had survived the worst pain a parent could endure, the loss of a life partner, and the abandonment of a child I had loved without question. Yet here I was, standing, whole though scarred, alone yet somehow free. My son's life had been shaken, and in those cracks the truth had begun to seep in. I didn't need to watch him crumble forever. Life has a way of teaching lessons with or without my interference, but I did watch him face the consequences of the choices he had made. The mortgage was eventually handled, yes, but not without fear, guilt, and the heavy weight of realization. He had finally understood what betrayal feels like, not in words, not in lectures, but in consequences he could not evade. And yet I felt no triumph in his suffering. There was no pleasure in seeing him humbled. Revenge, I realized, had never been the point. It had been recognition, justice, closure. The satisfaction came not from his pain, but from reclaiming my own life, my own dignity, and my own power. I walked through the house, touching the things she had left behind. Her scarf draped over a chair, her favorite teacup in the kitchen, the photographs of birthdays, anniversaries, and vacations long past. Each item was a reminder, not of what was lost, but of what had been. The love, the laughter, the life we had shared. Those memories were mine and mine alone, untouchable even by betrayal. I thought of my son. I wondered if he would ever apologize, if he would ever understand the depth of what he had done. Perhaps he would. Perhaps he wouldn't. And then I realized I didn't need him to. My peace didn't depend on his recognition. It depended on my own. There was a freedom in that realization, a weight lifted from my shoulders that I hadn't known I was carrying. I could grieve her fully, remembering not the tragedy of her passing, but the joy of her life. I could move forward, no longer bound by anger, resentment, or the expectations of a son who had failed me. I stepped outside into the late afternoon sun. The sky was a brilliant blue, dotted with clouds drifting lazily across the horizon. I breathed in the air, sharp and clean, and felt the warmth on my face. It was a small thing, a fleeting moment, but it felt monumental. Life continued, and for the first time in months, I felt that I could continue with it too. Some might say revenge had come full circle. Perhaps, but my true victory was subtler, quieter, and infinitely sweeter. The reclamation of my life. I would carry my grief, yes, but not as a shackle. I would carry it as a testament to love, to resilience, and to the strength I had found within myself. I thought of her one last time before entering the house. I whispered her name, soft and full of love. And in that whisper, I felt her presence, not in grief, not in loss, but in the enduring bond we had shared. My son had learned a lesson he would never forget. I had regained my peace, a gift far greater than any fleeting triumph over his arrogance. And in that peace, I found the final, quiet truth of it all. Sometimes the sweetest revenge is simply living well, carrying love forward, and leaving betrayal behind. I turned back toward the house, sunlight trailing my shadow across the lawn, and walked inside. The world was still waiting, vast and unknown. But I was ready for it. I was whole, I was free, and I was finally at peace.